I'm on the board of Y Combinator. 175 companies last batch, 159 were enterprise.
What are the unanswered questions that enterprises have today?
What data is going where in the enterprise, from all the employees to agentic applications, and what data they're sharing with those MCP servers, and how is the data flow happening between all of these MCP servers and within my own agentic application.
You have built multiple companies, sold Clumio to Commvault. The previous company you sold to Nutanix. Today raised $260 million combined across both your companies. How would you advise first-time founders on raising money and exploring M&A opportunities?
Whenever I look at starting something, you have to look at what's the big discontinuity happening in the sector. Back in the day, the big discontinuity was...
Hi, this is Siddharth Ahluwalia, your host at Neon Show and managing partner at Neon Fund, a fund that has invested in some of the best enterprise AI companies between the US and India corridor like Atomic Work, SpotDraft, CloudSec. Today I have with me Poojan Kumar. Poojan, welcome to the Neon Show.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thanks for having me.
You have built multiple companies. Recently you sold Clumio to Commvault. Today, you are the GM for the entire Clumio business line for Commvault, right? The previous company you sold to Nutanix, right? So it's been an amazing journey, and you are one of the folks who worked on the data storage, data warehousing for a long period of time. So how did in your life you decide to commit to this vertical? Yes. Maybe you can start with your Oracle journey, where you led the product.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been 25 plus years in the enterprise. Started off at Oracle as an engineer. And then I would say, sometimes, the right things happen, right place at the right time. We ended up working on something brand new and built it from scratch. That became Exadata, which essentially was the first integrated hardware software appliance that Oracle shipped for data warehousing. Before data warehousing moved to the cloud, that was the data warehousing play within Oracle. Still, doing really well, and it was one of the fastest growing products, getting to $1 billion of revenue at Oracle while I was there. Now, obviously, it's much bigger. But that was my first of seeing something beginning from scratch to, from an engineering writing code to seeing what happens when, the right product market fit happens. And of course, in that case, it was within Oracle and with, 10,000 plus sellers selling it. But really got an opportunity to see when, the product and technology meets the business of technology. So that gave me the drive and the spirit to go and say, I want to do this myself. Obviously, doing it yourself outside is very different and much harder to do than doing it within a safe this thing of Oracle. So I started Pernix. That was my first journey as founder CEO. And anytime, when I think about starting...
And which year was this when you started Pernix?
This was early 2012.
And you had already spent like 10 years with Oracle.
Yeah, this was already, I think, about 10 years at Oracle and a couple years at VMware also back then. So from Oracle, I had gone to VMware and then started Pernix. And whenever I look at starting something, at least in the enterprise, you have to look at what's the big discontinuity happening in the sector, right? Back in the day, in the storage space, Pernix was at the intersection of virtualization and storage. And so back in the day, the big discontinuity was a shift of from hard disks to flash, right? And flash was much faster, and the economics were getting better and better. And so that was a time when companies like Nutanix and Pure and all of these also were built. Fusion.io was a big player in the flash play. So we are really building a software that would make virtualization and flash in the server meet and make virtual environments operate much faster using flash in the server. So that was the thesis, using the discontinuity of hard disk to flash, and essentially that was the thesis behind Pernix. That was about almost a five-year journey. Sure. And ultimately that got acquired by Nutanix, which is where I spent some time at Nutanix, both integrating the Pernix stack into Nutanix.
And if you can give a rough idea of what scale did Pernix achieve before the acquisition?
Yeah, it was about 25 million of revenue.
Wow, independent.
Independently, yes. When we got acquired, we were about 25 million of revenue.
And how much you had raised at Pernix?
Pernix was funded about 60-ish million.
Very efficient.
Yeah, that was pretty efficient. Absolutely, yeah. And we had operations in multiple countries around the globe, and close to 900 paying customers when we got acquired.
And how much period of time you took it to from starting to 25 million in revenue?
So about 4.5 years from
that's
beginning
very
to acquisition. Yeah. And then a lot of it was, also I think it became very clear that this would thrive much better as part of a bigger company, and so that's what we did, and that was Nutanix was doing extremely well back then, and this was a good fit from a team perspective.
And this is when Nutanix had already scaled to $1 billion in revenue, or before that?
I don't think they had got to $1 billion. This is pre-IPO Nutanix.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, they hadn't got to $1 billion, but I might be wrong on that. Yeah. So it's all now. I'm jogging my memory. It's almost 10 years ago, right? The acquisition happened in 2016, if I remember right. That was that, and then Nutanix, was a great company and spent a good amount of time both with the Pernix side, but also looking at a few new initiatives within Nutanix. A couple of them are still around and doing well as far as I know. But then again, in 2017, I got to a point where the big discontinuity happening in the sector back then was public cloud, right? It was still relatively early days, you can say, of public cloud. AWS had done well, and then Azure was trying to do, and GCP was significantly behind, but again early investments in GCP. And then just companies like Snowflake and Datadog were good inspirations. They're not gone public yet.
They were very early back then.
Yes, relatively early. And so that became a motivation, like, okay, what can be done in the public cloud? Can you rethink an enterprise use case that would basically the public cloud economics, the public cloud scale would change it, right? So that was the thesis behind the Clumio idea, which was really about, can we build a backup, data protection, a cyber resilience platform in the public cloud, taking advantage of the primitives of the public cloud and ultimately going and catering to applications built in the public cloud, right? So that was the beginning of the journey at Clumio. That was late 2017, early 2018 is when we got started with Clumio. And that was about a 7-year journey to acquisition by Commvault almost a year and a half ago. But the journey continues. We're now part of Commvault, still kind of running the Clumio initiative and focusing on exactly the mission we started off with, and really going and continuing to build the business with Clumio, but as part of Commvault.
Understood. So if you can share more about the landscape of data backup, right? Which are the largest companies there? Where was Clumio solving a unique niche, and how did the acquisition happen?
Yeah, no, data backup I think has obviously been around, and there's multiple players in the space. One of them, Rubrik just went public about a year and a half ago also. So in general, I think you can kind of break it up into, historically companies focusing on backing up data center and on-prem environments really well. And then came public cloud, where the hyperscalers themselves would provide, backup and data protection for workloads in the public cloud. And then there is SaaS applications like Microsoft 365, Salesforce, and so on and so forth that also require, backup, right? And so if you look at it, these were essentially three use cases, and some companies, trying to do one or two, or in some cases trying to do all three of these use cases. Clumio was squarely focused on the public cloud use case, because again, more and more applications built in the cloud, and the scale and the architecture needed to go and provide backup and cyber resilience for them was very different than an architecture needed to go backup, on-prem or even backup SaaS applications, right? And so that's what we did at Clumio. But then if you look at the other players, including Commvault, it's more of a broader platform trying to cover SaaS, on-prem, and then also cloud use cases, right?
If you had seen how the trends are shifting now, what would you suggest that an entrepreneur who has similar background as yours in virtualization, in data storage, would build it for an AI world now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think today is a very different world of AI. And in fact, we ourselves asked this question to us repeatedly. Like, if you were building, Clumio today, how would you build it, right?
Would love to answer that question.
Exactly. How would you essentially think about, AI and agentic, and of course, now with the world of data protection and security, kind of adjacencies happening together, where customers are also asking us for, security feature sets on top of the protection platform. how would you essentially, kind of marry all of these three things together, right? The AI agentic stuff, the security stuff, and then your traditional data protection. And I think that is where I would say, irrespective of the field, that is where the opportunity exists, right? Because these are all very, very large markets, right? And the technologies to build it are very deep in most cases, right? But then, how do you essentially take advantage of what AI can give you, and essentially in some cases even build faster, right? And also in some cases think very different in terms of how you would essentially build it. Like for example, back in the day you would essentially say, okay, how do I build a platform which is very easy to use, right? Where somebody can come to your website and start using it, and even start consuming it, which is how Snowflake did it, which is consumption oriented. We at Clumio also did it the same way, right? Consumption oriented, right? And then again, now how do you take it to the next level where you make that whole thing very agentic also in terms of how the customer interacts with the platform, and so on and so forth, right? So it's time for any use case, and that's what's happening in security, if you see, right? Every use case in security also is getting rethought. Like, okay, how can I build a maybe an agent, right, that can do this automatically versus relying on how it was being done before. So every workflow is being reinvented, and every use case is being rethought, and that's how I would say anybody should think about it. Take a large problem, take a reasonably big market to go after, and essentially look at, okay, how would you essentially tackle it if you're building from scratch today? Because that's the advantage a startup has, because you don't have any legacy to deal with, and you can be very nimble and agile and really go and do something that typical large vendors can't do it very easily.
And let's say today you have to explain the entire data and storage stack for an AI world. How would you explain it to a layman?
Yeah, I mean, like for data and storage stack for an AI world, I think is more and more. I think if you look at AI applications are being built in the cloud, right? And so the stack in the cloud looks very different than an application that was built in the data center, right? And so this is a stack that is using very cloud native primitives, right? Which is where I think architecturally how we have built Clumio and all also matters, because these applications, these agentic applications in the cloud will also need protection, right? And if at all, will need more of it, because the chances of things going wrong could be higher, right? You can imagine, right? With all the stuff happening in an agentic world, you might want to go back in time and so on and so forth, right? But the primitives are more serverless architectures. The primitives are more scale technologies like S3 that Amazon provides, the object storage, right? Gone are the days that you're going to run applications sitting in big virtual machines and attaching storage to it and so on and so forth, right? You're basically going to build an architecture that can scale up and down as needed, can run anywhere around the globe in any region that the cloud provider provides it, and an infrastructure that can just come up. It's basically a bunch of Terraform that can bring up the infrastructure. The application can do its thing, and essentially use the primitives that the cloud provider provides in terms of large scale storage like S3 for their persistence and so on and so forth. So that's how these new applications look like. Now, good news is, as they are built, at least from selfishly from a cyber resilience platform perspective, all these applications in the enterprise will still need protection and cyber resilience and all that. So that's the benefit. Like, and as the applications are built in the cloud more and more and built for scale and so on and so forth, you have to go and rethink how you're going to protect them, and which is where platforms like us come in place.
What are the unanswered questions that enterprises have today in terms of storage security when they are deploying agents?
I think if you think about it, right, I think there's like if I'm sure if you're a CIO of any of large companies today and you're thinking about AI adoption, this whole thing around, sure, I don't know, like who is using what, like what data is going where in the enterprise, from my endpoints, from all the employees to agentic applications, and these agents, how are they interacting with MCP servers out there, and then what data they're sharing with those MCP servers, and how is the data flow happening between between all of these MCP servers and within my own agentic application. I think all of these things are real unanswered questions, and I think as more and more of this is going to happen, I think somebody needs to go and look at this holistically and make sure that if you're a CIO of a company, you can essentially have full visibility into from my endpoints, accessing these models out to the outside world, or all of these agentic applications that are interacting and even sharing my data with MCP servers, and what's being shared, and track the lineage of what happened when and what got shared in case I have to go back in time and see it. I think that is very early days. I don't think anybody has really tackled this holistically yet, but this is, I think, important.
But do you think enterprises are proactively deploying agents today, or not yet?
I think it's depending on who it is. I think obviously there is one thing that's definitely happening, which is adopting services that is abstracting it for you, right? So that's happening already. Like people definitely doing it for their own use cases, right? So for example, support is an interesting vertical, right? Which is a lot of stuff happening within support where the ticket deflection and automatic resolution of tickets. These are things that whether somebody builds it themselves or uses a third-party platform available out there. I think that's a vertical that you're seeing all of this happening. Like we're seeing in the legal vertical, with the Harveys of the world, right? So I think there are different verticals depending on the enterprise where they're definitely taking advantage of these things. So it's happening whether you're using a third-party application or in some cases building it yourself.
So when you started PernixData versus when you started Clumio, between both these worlds and today, how did the infrastructure change across these three worlds, Pernix, Clumio, and today?
I think it's a whole different world, right? And I think between Pernix and Clumio also, I felt it was very different. Where, back in the day, it was super early days of the cloud, public cloud. So in early 2012, obviously nobody was thinking, talking as much about the public cloud. I think maybe 2014, 2015 is the first time even AWS came and talked about how they're doing with their public cloud, as far as I remember. But when I started Clumio, I think it was like a cloud first world. Even like, in Pernix, I had a data center in my own office, right? And stuff like that, because obviously I had to test out all the storage, and I had VMware servers and all
that would have been really expensive.
Yeah, super expensive. I had when I moved offices also, remember I had to make sure I need a space for a data center and so on and so forth. All the testing we used to do. But Clumio, we just started in the laptops and everything was in the cloud, right? So it was just a very different world. And fast forward now, I think if you're starting today, you're even going to the next level, even using tools like Anthropic Claude Code and stuff like that, and really starting from the scratch with tools like that, and how you're scaling your organization, how even the assumptions of the business model and how fast you can scale your business in the AI world, I think is very different. Sky is the limit, right? In terms of how fast you can scale, how fast you can build things. Like, I think it's different. I thought between Pernix and Clumio it was a different world, but I think it's vastly different if you start a company today versus in a few years ago.
So in Pernix also you scaled to 25 million before acquisition. In Clumio also, I think the public numbers are you scaled to $25 million of revenue before the acquisition. So how was scaling different in both these companies? What was required to scale in both these companies?
I think it's very different, right? I think in the traditional, in the data center world, it was again it was really about at the end of the day hiring your sales team and going after the traditional buyer and stuff like that. Even from that to Clumio, the buyer profile really changed, right? Because firstly, it was very consumption oriented. You could actually go and start using the platform and scaling yourself, like people used public cloud, right? And started using it, like how people are doing, with AI today, right? And stuff like that. Nobody is necessarily talking to a salesperson to start using some of these things. So that had already started happening between, I would say, Pernix and Clumio, where people would essentially start, using the platform and without needing to talk to anybody in the company, right? And that mindset was super important. And there's obviously folks like AWS that pioneered that, and folks like Snowflake that also did that. And so, but today that's a given, right? Today's buyer, out there is essentially going and doing their own, research and going and figuring it out, even in wanting to try out things themselves. And maybe when it comes to a point that they're doing a very broad scale adoption, and the CIO gets involved, and it's a bigger this thing, that is when I think sales and the traditional that stuff is there. But otherwise, the ground up adoption is how you have to target it. You have to essentially think about how are you going to essentially get this thing in the hands of your end user, make it very easy, and essentially make sure that it's something that is loved by the end user, and that's how and I think all the successful companies today in the AI space are pretty much that, right? I think they have seen adoption ground up, and it's not really top down where somebody.
And why is adoption ground up and not top down today?
Because I think this is the day and age where people want to be able to touch and feel the things. It's not something that I'm using this because I was told to use this, because somebody told that I shook hands with somebody else and decided to use this platform. The end user wants to essentially go have use the thing they want to go and use, right? And they will go and do their own thing and go figure it out. And you cannot essentially if you try to do anything top down, you're going to have either people who are unhappy, or essentially it's not going to succeed. I think the right way is to see what is getting adopted.
Yeah, I think the right examples could be Claude versus all others, right? Claude versus Cursor and Codex and Copilot.
Yep.
Like, because all these three companies, Cursor, Codex by OpenAI and Copilot by Microsoft, they have all sold to the enterprises.
Yes.
But developers are not using them.
Correct, exactly. And if you see, like, look at what Claude has done, right? It's just mind-boggling, right? It's the scale is mind-boggling, and I'm sure it's continuing to scale after that. But again, that's the thing, right? It's like the equivalent of the developer for a Claude code is exactly how you can say it was a cloud architect for AWS, right? Or a DevOps person in the AWS world, right? So on and so forth. Right? It's like I think there's a lot of analogies you can draw. That's exactly how these things got very successful. They built an honest product that worked, right? That when developers wanted to try it, they could try it, and they fell in love with it, right? That's how it works.
And how do you, because you have seen the entire journey, when and how did Cloud outgrew the backup playbook?
Yeah, means I think obviously initially it was all AWS, right? And then Azure came in, and then GCP. Now of course we have GCP, we have Azure, we have AWS, and we have OCI. So I think today it's a very different world than it was back then. But one thing was very clear. I think as more and more mission critical stuff started going to the cloud, right? Where I cannot lose this data. This is customer facing data, right? I cannot have and the infrastructure was essentially something that was not managed by clicking buttons on a UI, but by code, right? And mistakes can happen, right? Where you can essentially go and I wanted to delete this, by mistake I deleted something else, right? So stuff like that, when all of that stuff started happening, and when mission critical applications, customer facing applications started moving to the cloud, it became very clear that okay, I need to make sure that the underlying data has a copy, right? Just in case of anything bad. But obviously the cloud vendor is making sure that I have 11 nines of durability. That's awesome. But that doesn't prevent from a deletion happening, because if I ask a cloud vendor to delete something, guess what? The cloud vendor will delete it, because you asked me to delete it, and once it's deleted, it's gone. So that durability does not help you with deletion, right? And so this is where you need to have a different copy. And then of course with the the whole thing around ransomware and stuff like that, obviously a typical ransomware is going to essentially go and attack your primary, but they also will attack your backup if there is a backup, because that is your resort to go and recover, right? So then that became an important thing where okay, I need to keep my protected copy in a security domain that is separate from my primary, right? So that basically means I have to somehow keep it either with a third party or make sure that the security of that is not compromised if the security of this is compromised. And also, backup also and data protection also became a way of detecting some of the bad actors, because guess what? When a bad actor comes and starts encrypting a bunch of data, the protection and this resilience platform that is backing it up also notices it and can see anomalies and detect it and say, oh, by the way, I'm seeing this. Is this expected? And can alert the user. So I think all of these things came together, and it became a thing where, okay, irrespective of the destination of the data, where it's sitting in a SaaS provider like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce, or sitting in my data center or sitting in the cloud, I still need to think about cyber resilience as a holistic thing. And so that's what has happened over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years.
You have previously had your opinions on multi-cloud, and you have said fragmented clouds are silent killers. What do you mean by that?
No, I think see, ultimately, if you look at it, historically, people would essentially look at build on a single cloud, right? The reason to go multi-cloud has been very, like, in some cases it's been more business, and
you are getting partnerships from all three clouds.
Exactly. Some cases being I bought something that is based off a different cloud and stuff like that. But I think no matter what, you really have to go and figure out which public cloud is the right one for you, and which application is the one you want to put. Like, okay, maybe in some cases of analytics thing you want to maybe go GCP, maybe something else you're going AWS, and so on and so forth, right? But net of it is, I think, very rarely do you see this fragmentation happening, that you're running everything everywhere. That doesn't make any sense, and you're basically inviting more issues for you, and the automation, and because the infrastructure in the public cloud, the way you're using it, it's just a piece of code spinning up infrastructure. So management becomes a headache, costs, and so on and so forth, right? So this fragmentation doesn't really make too much sense. But having said that, the larger enterprise today, as we know, are all multi-cloud, and that is a new reality, and that's great, because for the cyber resilience play for folks like us. At the end of the day, we provide that.
You provide solutions for managing multi-cloud.
That's this thing. But again, that doesn't mean it's as fragmented. But at the end of the day, as far as you have some meaningful stuff running everywhere, it makes more sense.
But I think some of the folks started for optimizing cost across the three cloud, but ultimately you end up with more cost because your risk, security, and compliance across all three clouds triple up.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. That's why I think you have to be very thoughtful in terms of how you do
why you are doing it, and cost cannot be the only factor.
Yes. And sometimes you're not in control, as I said. I think more of large clients that we have, and I'm sure others see the same thing. You acquire companies, and those companies have been built on a certain cloud. You're not going to change those things.
Certain architectures are there.
Certain architectures, exactly, they're already existing. So you end up living through that.
In your journey, you have today raised almost $260 million combined across both your companies, right? Had two very successful exits. So how would you advise first-time founders on first raising money, and second, the process of raising money, and second on exploring M&A opportunities, how to do that, how to build relationships with your prospective buyers?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Two different things. I think in terms of raising money, obviously, I think the world has changed. What used to be seed when I started Pernix is very different than what is seed today, right? And Series A and so on and so forth. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it's very important to go raise the right amount of money to be successful, right? I see fundraising as more of a thing that gets you from point A to point B, and you have to be very clear what the point A is, what the point B is, and what it takes to essentially get there. And I think sometimes having too much is also a problem, because you can get distracted and do things that you typically would not have done. So I think that's something that is super important. I think I've made my fair share of mistakes there too, when you raised way more capital than what you needed, right? So I think that's something to keep in mind also. Obviously, whom you want to raise it from, the right partner matters a lot, because if you're taking a long-term point of view, you want somebody who's taking a long-term point of view, and so on and so forth, and also getting the right partner so that you're essentially getting what you need from that individual or that firm, right? Those are the other things. M&A completely different, right? I'll compare it to a large deal, right? If you're trying to sell a large deal to a customer, you're essentially going to internalize that it's going to take time. Right? It's not going to happen overnight, right? If somebody is going to make a big purchase, they're going to want to, get to know you, the team, get to, use the platform, and there's a trust that is also established over time when somebody is, at least early on, before you become a well-known brand and stuff like that. Early on, if somebody, a CIO or whoever, a customer in their shoes is making a big bet on you, there's that trust that takes time, right, to establish. Same thing, I would say, from an M&A perspective, right? When somebody is, is looking to buy a company, at the end of the day, they're buying, a platform, a company, to essentially make it part of the bigger entity and really grow it, right? And so I think it's a large deal at some level, right? It's similar to a large deal. So I think that it takes time. It takes time, whether you're working with the product owner or the CEO on the other side. If you're a founder, CEO yourself, if that's your goal, I think you need to take the time to make the relationship, to make sure that there is a good fit from both sides and there's alignment in terms of, because the job is not done the day the acquisition happens. There's a different job that starts, but it starts the day, and so there has to be alignment in terms of what that journey looks like post acquisition. Especially for a founder, you've created this is your baby, and you're essentially going as part of maybe a larger company and merging. It's still your baby, and you need to make sure that there's alignment in terms of what that baby's future looks like as part of the bigger company, I think. And all of those things, I think, time in both ways. I think somebody acquiring also, at the end of the day, they're spending money and they're investing even after the acquisition. They are trusting you for what you created and what you're going to continue with, up to a certain point. I'm sure things can change over time, but at least for some time post acquisition, there has to be the exact alignment in terms of what that looks like, right? So all of those things, I would say, is what you should think about, especially when you're looking not just to optimize the price tag, but really optimizing the fact that what you created continues to live on and continues to delight customers, in a different form factor, but continues to do that. That mission should not change.
So in your journeys, how did the first relationship with Nutanix happen? And the second journey, how did the relationship with Commvault happen?
Yeah, I would say Commvault was unique. I'll talk. Nutanix was the easier one, I would say, because again, firstly, our companies was right across each other. But more importantly, the founder, CEO of Nutanix, I'm a big fan of him, Dheeraj. He's doing a new company called DevRev right now. He's somebody, I've known from my Oracle days, right? So I obviously saw Nutanix from its early days and had a lot of respect for him and what he had created, and that relationship at some level is already there.
Okay, so you knew him from Oracle.
From a long time, exactly. Yeah, we pretty much grew up together at Oracle, right? And then we shared the same investor and in terms of Lightspeed and so on and so forth. So a lot of things were common. Commvault, on the other hand, was very different. I did not know the CEO, Sanjay. It was an East Coast based company, so nothing in common, you can say. East Coast, West Coast. It was not a CEO I knew, no investors in common, and so on and so forth. But that's a relationship that I took time to build, and I would say I think there's a lot of cultural elements that were very common with the two companies. The mindset, the customer first mindset, and I really clicked with Sanjay. I really am a big fan of what he has done over the last 6+ years at Commvault, and I genuinely felt that okay, if this were to happen again, I think it was a year and a half before the acquisition is when I met him for the first time.
Okay, so you knew him for one and a half years?
Yeah, but before that I never met him. So it was this thing. I knew him for a year and a half. We had kept in touch. But more importantly, I think it was very clear from meeting one up until the day of acquisition, and even more true today. There's a lot of alignment in terms of what the future looks like, and I think I felt that this is a place where the platform will thrive and do really well, and will continue the journey to delight customers, and that's what we're doing today.
One of the very important points now I want to bring up is you sold a 8-figure deal, in your second company. So how did you, as a founder, learn from, let's say, selling to from 4-figure to 5-figure to 6 to 7 to 8?
Yeah.
How did that journey happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think irrespective of the size of the deal, means any deal, whether it became 6 figures or 7 figures, at the end of the day, it started small, right? Everything started small, right? Obviously, in some cases, the customer itself is not very big, so obviously there's a certain scale it can get to. We know that. In some cases, we know the customer is large, so obviously it can get much bigger. But in all cases, I would say, I think the number one thing that we would always focus on is to make sure that what we said we are going to do, we deliver that, right? What the as I always joke about, right, it's very easy to build products in PowerPoint, right? But then it's very hard to build products in reality and products that work well in a customer environment, solve the customer pain, and continue to scale as the customer scales, as the demand scale, right? And I think that is what we take a lot of pride at. So in the case of large customers that have scaled with us, even though it has started small, one thing that we have done is we've kept close. Like, we would create a Slack channel between the customer and the folks on the customer side, the users on the customer side, and our own engineers and SEs and stuff like that. And so there's real-time communication, right? And that builds trust, and our responses on all of those. Until today, we do that with our large customers, right? With our large customers, it's the relationship is a very intimate relationship, and that gives the trust to the customer. And obviously, the product and the platform has to work and continues to scale. You combine that along with the responsiveness and all of those things, and staying on top of issues. And again, things happen, but how you deal with them when things happen, that matters a lot. You do all of those things right, automatically, the deal sizes go up, in the sense that the customer scales and you essentially go scale with them. I think that just happens. As I say, do the right things, and some of these things just happen.
And you were a technical founder, right?
Absolutely.
When you were at Oracle, how did you graduate to learn sales?
No, I think it was hard. I would say, I joke about it, right? As a first-time CEO at Pernix, I was totally clueless, right? Didn't even know how to go about hiring my first salesperson, what to even ask. And so this is where, I would essentially surrounding myself with people who had done it before in the form of advisors. And the good news, at least in Silicon Valley, for people in Silicon Valley, I think there is so much out here, and so much access to people and founders who have done it before, and people who are willing to give back to the founders of today, right? So I think that exists, at least in Silicon Valley it exists. So I would basically do that, surround myself with folks like that, who would essentially, I know, are my advisors at Pernix, at least, like, literally would help me even in interviewing our head of sales, and before even we had a head of sales, interviewing with the reps. And in some case, VCs who have essentially either been operators themselves or have essentially been in startups for long enough, they would also essentially be folks who would help you with all of these things. So I think just making sure that you have the right ecosystem of people who can complement you in places that you don't know. I know what I'm building. I know how to go and build a world-class engineering team and build the product and stuff like that. So maybe I don't need as much there, but everywhere else, marketing, how do you launch the company, sales, all of those things, at least doing it for the first time, you want to surround yourself with folks who can help you with that, and then be very grounded and be humble and listen and take it all in. And that's how, at least, I have been able to adapt myself and learn and do some of these things. And which is what I tell whenever I help any founders today, I also basically tell them the same thing, right? Yeah, just any place that you feel you don't have the right skill set and you don't know what you don't know, that's okay. There's enough people out there who know it, and you just got to get surround yourself with those folks, and that's it. It's as simple as that. I think the key is to have the humility to do that.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Poojan. Loved our interaction. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this, and and I'm super excited in what you folks are doing with the Neon Fund, and where you're going with this.
Thank you so much. Means a lot.
Yeah, thank you.